Do you like chocolate, pretzels, cinnamon rolls? I sure do. I'm your host, George Lucas Pfeiffer. Welcome to the Work Inspired podcast. Today we've got Chief Transformation Officer for ICRA Group, Nick Melka, here to discuss innovation, transformation, and to sprinkle in some tidbits from the food industry that are sure to make your mouth water. Let's get started. Welcome to Work Inspired. Nick, thanks for being here. Really excited for the conversation. You are in an interesting industry, which sounds delicious, and I'm interested to unpack it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I didn't know much about coming out of consulting, and then it's kind of just been, I guess it kind of just found me based on Focus Brands and now ICRA Group.
Well, let's start by talking about you, and then we'll get to ICRA Group. Tell your professional story. How did you kind of start out and get to where you're at today?
Yeah, absolutely. So started in management and strategy consulting, as a lot of folks do coming out of college, and spent a solid 6.5 years at Deloitte Consulting. And during that time, touched all different types of projects, all different industries, and actually very little time in the food industry itself. A few consumer packaged goods customers, but clients. But other than that, the food industry was a little bit new to me, but there came a point where I was ready to go and experience industry and explored what I was a little more comfortable with, which was, technology and SaaS software companies. But an opportunity at Focus Brands came up, and it was something I'd been following from a distance, just the whole concept of aggregating fast food and, QSR, fast casual, and even, higher end restaurant groups into a portfolio company. Someone just got in touch with the opportunity and kind of just ran with it, and took the job at Focus Brands, moved to Atlanta, and it was the best decision I ever made. And then just really kind of found myself in the food service space. I'd say Focus Brands, right? It's a portfolio company, and it owned awesome brands such as Annie Ann's Cinnabon, Jamba Juice, Moe's Burritos, McAllister's Deli. We had 7 different fast casual brands, and I think it was a different element, right? Because it was a lot more focused on the brand management component, right? A lot of marketing and just actually managing those brands. But it certainly had a very heavy culinary aspect, developing the menu, and then really cool working with, I think, the franchisees and learning that model. So during my time there, it was corporate strategy and M&A. So unfortunately, we didn't bring another brand home while I was there, welcomed into the family. So focusing a lot on growth strategy, putting together some of the frameworks for digital transformation, a lot of those aspects, but I think really focused on a true, direct to consumer B2C type brand elements, right? Because we were focusing on how do we ultimately help our franchisees, sell more and drive their average unit volumes and their sales. Then when I ultimately went to ICRA Group, it became very different because it is more that B2C model, but B2B2C, because you do need to think about these are food products, and they're very beautiful food products. And there's still the element of how do we help our customers use our ingredients to ultimately make these gorgeous, very marketable, appealing sweets products. And so ultimately at ICRA Group, Chief Transformation Officer, which is leading the transformation agenda. It's a very new company. We are bringing together a lot of different legacy companies and brands, and we are ultimately rolled up under a parent company in Milan, Italy. And it is aggregating, all of these different types of beautiful food brands, but at the end of the day, food manufacturing and really an ingredients company. And so, really, I have been, I've always had a really monster sweet tooth. And so it kind of was just like a natural fit. And it's chocolate, Cinnabons, pretzels. It's just kind of what I know very well now.
First of all, if I was in that industry, I would struggle because Cinnabons and pretzels and candy sounds amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I spent previously to my role here at BOS, I worked in the beverage alcohol industry, which has a close tie into the food,
the portfolio concept.
Exactly. And I'm interested just based off of like the structuring of this, like what, we were on the distribution side, but I worked closely with a manufacturer like Diageo, which buys brands, and, a brand might start off as a family owned brand, and then Diageo kind of acquires it, and they're the manufacturer, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Is it similar in your industry where when you bring in a brand into the group, does that company kind of continue to operate as it was before, but just with the resources of the larger group? Or do you actually take on the manufacturing and integrate it into the entire process? How much of it's kind of brand management versus actual manufacturing and in the production of goods?
Definitely has both components, but
Okay.
yeah, that's I think the name of the game is ultimately we are making these ingredients and we do own all of the manufacturing
Mm,
aspects of it.
interesting.
hmm But very similar to where I think the background, somewhat like a Diageo, but then,
Mm,
that is what we have numerous end customers at ICRA Group, but distributors is a huge piece of it, especially in the food service
mm,
game. That's how all the product is ultimately distributed
yeah.
and supplied to the folks that are actually making it for the end consumer.
Well, I definitely want to get into the innovation of chocolate and food and some of the products that you guys create because it sounds very interesting. But tell me first, what's the culture like at IRCA Group?
I think the culture, it's new because
Mm,
you are bringing together and, it's all over Europe. It's truly a global company. So you're bringing together I think that's the wild card of it, right? It's
mm,
not just, oh, we're establishing a new culture amongst in the US. It's just a new culture holistically at the company. But I'd say the IRCA Group leadership in Milan and in the US has done a really good job of really establishing it. It's almost just humble Italian roots and Italian heritage, right? IRCA Group's been around many, many years. And I think that's something that we ultimately really lean heavily into.
mm,
It's a very humble approach. It's very product and customer focused, right? We have the most beautiful premium high-end quality products and customer service is, I think, one of the number one things of the culture. Our culture is very much built around that. And the leadership in Milan has done a really good job of making that known to us in the US, and like everyone is very bought in. I would say the other very cool element about the culture is when you're bringing together all these companies and brands that had different cultures before, so you certainly think there could be some clash, but in the US there has been absolutely none of that. It's a
mm,
very collaborative approach. Everyone is very, very eager and wants to help one
mm,
another. And then our European counterparts are the same way. They always want to help. They have expertise that they bring. We have expertise that we bring. I think everyone brings kind of like the best of their cultures before to blend it in and galvanize it around the customer service. So the culture has been something that's been very cool. It's certainly evolved and will continue to evolve, but it was kind of like everyone grabbed on right away and was pretty bought in, and that was very cool to see because I just know in consulting, it's very easy to have a situation where there's some clash, and there's really none of that, and
mm.
that's been, I think, probably one of the at least the best parts and most motivating parts for me.
I'd say it's always been important, but there's been a focus recently on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But diversity, I think, can take many different forms. And sometimes we think about it as a race or a gender type of a thing. I think diversity in cultures from a geography perspective is also something that's important. And it sounds like something that's unique at your organization when you're able to take a brand that's maybe Italian and then combine it with a company or brand from America or from another part of the world. Is that something that you said that they don't clash, but is that something that gets celebrated? Like where you've got you're bringing together these great brands from different parts of the world. Are there learnings from one another? Is there collaboration opportunities to say, oh, that's interesting. That's how they do that in Milan.
Oh,
This is how we do it
absolutely.
here in Atlanta or Wisconsin or
hmm
wherever you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because at the end of the day, it is all about these making these beautiful food products. That's something I think that you can translate that across borders, right? And
Hmm.
so for us, especially when you work with the culinary and R&D teams, that's a really cool thing to see where because some of the brands, right? For example, your group has a like absolutely gorgeous, the most high quality pistachio brand.
Mm.
And that's something that I think in Italy they know way more about. It's significantly more popular there, but it is wildly popular in the US as well. And so I think that's where you'll see a lot of the learnings. There's not much lost in translation because at the
Mm.
end of the day, it's talking about these beautiful, high quality food products. And then certainly learnings, I think, from one another in terms of the elements of how you would feature and sell and market these products, right?
Mm. Tell me about innovation in food. What does that look like?
That has been something that I think really has like locked me in this industry. I think extremely important at Focus Brands, extremely important at IRCA Group as well. I think the innovation in food concept is usually customer driven. I think when we were, at Focus Brands, it was a lot about innovating in terms of like, how do you ultimately make something more appealing on the menu? Um, Working and thinking through LTOs that will ultimately drive traffic, but it's something that's going to be appealing to the customer. But then I also think there was an element of how do we innovate to create staple products on the menu?
Mm.
And so then I think at your group, the innovation is very much like an innovation partnership. I think that's a lot of what our R&D team puts down is they're the innovation partner, right? We have these wonderful ingredients. Sometimes, you would think it could be easy. Oh, it's just a sprinkle, but there is an art to how you use the sprinkle. What product can it go in? Is it bake stable? How is it cooked? What does it ultimately, the final end products that it's most appealing and applicable to versus just dumping a bunch of sprinkles on something. So I think the innovation aspect too is just very much working with our customers to say what's going to ultimately be the best from our portfolio of ingredients to what they're looking for to, from their aspect, appeal to an end consumer and a customer, just like you and I go into a store and buying a chocolate product.
Yeah. We talked about a little bit before in our planning call about the different ways of working at ICRA Group. And I was kind of fascinated by the R&D component in these test kitchens. And you talk about these high quality kitchens where there's experimentation going on, and there's the developing the next, is it safe to say, the next generation of food products or quality food products? What does that look like? Have you been to one of these kitchens? Tell me a little bit about that.
I should start by saying I never even knew just how complex it is when you're working on some of these food products. It's something when you're in it, you're like, oh, wow, it is very complex, but at a high level, you're thinking, okay, I can bake a product, but it's certainly not that. I think from the innovation aspect, and when these teams are working together closely, whether, like I said, customer and us, or at Focus Brands, it was just the chefs there. There's a lot of back and forth of, let's taste it. Does it have the right texture? Do you need to change the elements of, the different fats? Is there a different, component and ingredient you need to bring in that's going to make it, is it applicable to ice cream? Can you bake it? Or other aspects like that. But there is a lot of back and forth, and it's kind of like that art. I don't have it. I don't know if you have it unless you're a food scientist or a classically trained chef. But it is, I think, a lot of back and forth and tasting, testing, and then reformulating based on that.
Yeah. I'll never forget. I was up in Montreal. They were making bourbon, but making it at scale. And the quality control aspect of it blew me away. All these test tubes and beakers, and they're like one drop more, because of the way that whiskey's aged and bourbon's aged. They, every single barrel was a little bit different. And so these scientists were basically going through and saying, all right, well, we got to have this level of quality that's consistent across our product as we mass distribute this to the market. And I was like, I never had thought about it that way.
Yeah.
And so like you think about, cooking, and you think about a home kitchen, and maybe a family recipe that's, repeated over generations, and it's great and everybody loves it. But when you get into some of these brands, I think that's got to be another piece of innovation, not just getting a product that is amazing, but being able to scale that up and distribute it so that it's amazing every single time.
Yeah, two good examples of that. When I was at Focus Brands, right? If you go to any grocery store in the country, you're going to see like a Cinnabon licensed product, right? And that was certainly on the Focus Brands culinary teams to make sure when you're working with whoever the manufacturer of the licensed product that had the Cinnabon logo on it, it's making sure that it has the right, I guess, it's almost the brand translated into taste. There's a certain aspect of how much cinnamon is there. Do you have like the taste of the frosting baked into the product? I don't know. I've seen the Cinnabon popcorn, for example. I feel like I've seen that in the stores. Maybe I'm making that up, but does it have the right level of cinnamon? Can you almost, how do you actually infuse the Cinnabon brand components that dovetail down into the level of the flavor into the product? I would say the thing at ICRA Group has been fascinating to me. And we always say the chocolate game, it's very much like wine. It really is, especially in Europe. It's an art. It really is an art. And I think that stems from the quality of ingredients that you're bringing in. There's, more premium, higher end chocolates that just like the melt in your mouth. Then there's the more mass produced chocolates that are going to go out, an ice cream bar, for example. And those, at least to me, sometimes it's like, oh, chocolate's just chocolate. But no, it's not. And I think you see that in a way in ICRA Group in more of the quality of the chocolate itself, right? Like that's the brand, is the high quality ingredients. And then there's the visual appeal as well. We can't, in all of these aspects, there's the visual appeal to maintain, I think, some of the brand standards. So I think that's been really cool to see at both companies. It's taking something like a brand strategy and then the brand positioning, and how do you actually infuse that into a product and make sure it's high quality and maintains the elements of the brand.
When you are rolling out a new product or piloting or testing something new, let's say it's a new innovation with chocolate. I don't even know what that looks like. Do you test it internally first? Does it get sampled across your organization? Do you have a focus group with consumers? Like, how do you know when you've got a winner versus when you should maybe pull it back a little bit and rework?
I think it just kind of depends on what type of product you're using for chocolate. For example, what kind of chocolate product is it, and who are you ultimately working with? And then most importantly, who's the actual end consumer? There's better for you chocolates. You've seen them all over the shelves, like keto chocolates, like lower sugar chocolates. I think the pass back on that could be different, more scientific than some that are just more of a taste element. But I couldn't do justice to the hardworking R&D teams, the culinary teams, and all these chefs that I currently work with at our company, and I worked with at Focus Brands before. It really is an art. It's really that creative element. I'm not creative enough to even speak to that at the level of depth that these folks do. But it's been definitely one of the coolest parts of the job for me. When I was at Focus Brands early on, right, it was Q1 2021. It was safe to go back to the office, but we hadn't, most companies hadn't started mobilizing that yet. But I was there every day, and the culinary teams were there every day, and that's just they became like my best friends because we were just in the building together every day, and I would go down and kind of watch them work sometimes, and it's definitely like a classically trained chef. It's very much a skill set. Just watching them work and kind of hearing them talk about these products, it's completely different, right? When we eat cinnamon, oh my God, a cinnamon is so decadent and sweet, or this chocolate bar, oh my gosh, it tastes so good. But then really, like I said, it goes back to the wine tasting. A sommelier, when they are able to say, oh, can you taste the hint of fruit or something like that? I think that's kind of the creative aspect, that it's very cool to work with them and just almost like hear them describe the product versus how you or I would just talk about how good a chocolate bar tastes.
Yeah, that makes sense. I remember being in the liquor business, and vodka had a moment, and then it was bourbon, and then tequila's on the rise. And then, are you able to forecast trends in food?
Yes, that's probably one of the biggest aspects of innovation, right? Whether it's, like I said, whether it was Focus Brands or ICRA Group, you're always staying up on the trends. Certainly, there's, I think, a little bit more conscious of the better for you aspect, and that's not only in chocolate. I think that's across the board. How do you make the products with some of the dietary restrictions that are required? For example, I can't eat gluten. So for me, it's, if I'm going to get a sandwich somewhere, it's like, I know who has the gluten-free bread. I think staying up on trends and flavor taste, that's something that I've seen take on two different flavors at both of those companies. And it is very a different market sense. And it's not as simple as just like, identifying top food trends on Google or something like that. But your group, we have really strong people that, that's kind of all they do. And they have their different ways of identifying the trends, because a lot of them are global, right? It's like some of the trends we've seen in the US that have taken off and become really popular from like an Asian cuisine aspect. Those have always been big in some part of the world. So it's almost like, how did that come over here? How is it socialized? And how did it gain in popularity?
Yeah, it's interesting because we look at that from a workplace design perspective too. You see these trends even, intercontinentally, shifting from, the West Coast into the Midwest, or, something that's been done in APAC for a long time is now, being emulated here, or vice versa. It's real interesting to look at the shifting of trends around the world.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one cool thing about your organization, having locations throughout. You can sample some of those trends or get more data and insight into what might be coming. Or
absolutely. So a lot of times, that's the heavy component. If I were to say, even just as someone that is even pre going to your group, but then if you look at even from like a protein bar perspective, I feel like those are sometimes the brands that will get a little wild with the flavor, but that's to differentiate. And you've seen like the Fruity Pebble trend take off, and you're always kind of watching at that, because it's sometimes you can go up there and it's just like a brownie protein bar, but then there's like fudge brownie sundae protein bars, or like a s'mores or something like that. Identifying the trend, I think, is one thing, but then I think bringing it and making it, transfusing it into your product is definitely an art. And that's, I think, that something that our culinary teams and innovation arm is very good at and really work with customers on.
Very cool. So we talked a lot about food innovation. What else is a chief transformation officer at a company like ICRA Group concerned with? What's on the transformation radar over the next 12 to 48 months?
I think it's a lot of, building new business models and really ways of working, right? I think folks have been, like I said, everyone kind of brings their strengths to the table. How do you combine those and turn those into the sustainable long-term capabilities that built on the people process technology frameworks. But I think that's a lot of what it is, right? And sometimes I think we know what's on the docket, and then you identify new things, right? Because new opportunities come up in the food space. It's, very quick based on the trends. You got to shift. But I would say I think that's a big thing. It's really just kind of like bringing together and gelling a lot of the ways of working.
From a digital perspective, I think you mentioned that when you're at Focus, is there digital transformation that is on your radar as well? It seems like a lot of times in these interviews, people are talking about when it comes to innovation and transformation, some of the advancements in the digital space seem to be top of mind. Is that true in your industry as well?
Yeah, I think, I think that's part of the ways of working and
Yeah.
bringing kind of welding things together. Like there's legacy systems, there's new systems, and I don't, it's not as extreme, I think, as a lot of the digital transformations you've heard before. Some folks talking about it, but yeah, there's always, I think, the aspect of just infusing some digital capabilities, bringing new capabilities or shared capabilities to the table that are digital in nature, whether that was from across operations or the commercial and selling aspect as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously with a hands-on approach with, the culinary art that you've talked about, maybe is a little bit more insulated from some of the advancements with artificial intelligence and technology that we see in other industries.
There's certainly a place for artificial intelligence in the food and really that R&D and recipe building space. I think that's just something that I can't talk about at a granular level. But when I was at Focus Brands, we obviously saw a lot of that. And if you just follow, I think the food industry, especially, I think digital transformation has where you really see it in food industries, especially now, like loyalty programs of a lot of the fast food chains, right? Like we know McDonald's didn't have a loyalty program probably like 3 years ago now. It's huge. You walk in, there's a digital kiosk. I do feel like that's where I saw the heavy lift in the digital transformation side is, you pull up something like a Domino's app. I feel like they were ones first to the table and really like embrace that. We're going all in on digital, and they were right. And if you, I don't eat Domino's all the time, but I have gone on their app, and that was a lot of, I think, what I saw at Focus as well. Is it's very like customer focused, and there's an art to the way that the app and the website are even laid out to make it a seamless process for a customer just to order.
We had the head of innovation for Gilbane, which is a big construction company, on. And I asked this question. I'm interested in your perspective. When you think about innovation or transformation, how much of it is, all right, I'm at a new company, it's growing quickly, there's a lot of change going on, looking backwards and saying, let's fix some of the challenges that we've got, versus looking forwards and saying, forecasting into the future, let's set ourselves up so that we capitalize on all the opportunities ahead. Kind of, if you thought about your day as your work in 100% scale, what percentage is kind of looking back and fixing versus looking forward and planning or preparing?
To allocate a 50-50 split, I think is tough. I personally, I think an art of transformation is everything you do look back on, you have to fix. Well, there's a time and a place for a Band-Aid fix, but there's more of a time and a place to say, all right, what all needs to get fixed, but then where are we also going in the future? So like, if you're going to fix something, how do you bring those two together, right? And so it's not just like I say, Band-Aid, 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 Band-Aid. Okay, cool. Now we can look towards the future and build what we need. It's, based upon what needs to be fixed, how do you, I think the art of a transformation agenda is putting it together in a structure that is easily grasped and digested by the folks that are actually going through it. And a lot of time that it is showing, I think, progress and progression. And so rather than saying we're trying to fix a problem that you guys had before, it's okay, like how did we do it before? Here's how we're going to do it in the future. So how do we, I think, weld those together into the much more, not a Band-Aid, but just building something completely new that addresses some of the past, but is taking us to the future.
It's a great answer.
To say, it's hard for me to say 50-50 because I think that's the way I've always, even from the consulting days, it's never just like a, retrospective fix and then start up new. It's kind of just taking where you are and running with it moving forward.
Let me ask one more question as it relates to transformation. How much is it looking at what your competition's doing and figuring a way to do it better, or at least catch up if you're behind, versus saying, we're going to not care about what they're doing and we're going to do something different? I think about run our marketing team, and we talk about website redesign. So one thing is to say, let's start by looking at all of our competitors' websites or other industry players and see what they're doing on their website, and then we'll make a plan from there. and just knowing the market.
Mhm.
The other is like, well, let's not even worry about that. Let's talk to our, our stakeholders internally and externally and just put together our own plan. Think about effective transformation. Is it a combination of the two of those, or do you kind of lean towards one over the other?
I think again, it's a combination.
Yeah.
I think the transformation is something I've been involved with since consulting through all the way where I'm at now. And a competitive assessment is always very crucial, I think, right? Having a pulse on what competitors are doing is what's going to allow you to actually spot the ways to differentiate. But then, in any industry, I think there's certain areas where competitive assessments and metrics brought into the fold is pricing, for example, right?
Yeah.
And that's not food specific. I think pricing across the board, really for any business that's selling an end product, is your pricing has to be on par. If you are going to price higher, then what's the value add to the customer? Why would the elasticity go a little bit higher? Why would they be willing to actually pay more? But I think just arbitrarily pricing something, whether it is a sprinkler, whether it's a monthly subscription to a software, it needs to actually be taken into account. How do you benchmark your price against competitors? If you're lower, what's the reason, right? How are you actually going to sell it to the customer? If it's higher, if it's on par, if it's higher, what is differentiated about it? Why would I be willing to pay more?
Very cool. Final question on transformation. You had experience at Deloitte as a consultant, and then you went to the client side, and now you do it in-house. What was that transition like? Is it easier to transform when you're part of the team, or is there a benefit to being a third party that comes in and offers advice?
I think one of the biggest difference was in consulting, it seemed harder at the time, but then when you go to the other side, you actually realize it's the tactical execution is significantly more challenging than putting together the transformation, the strategy, the plan, and like almost the project management of how it gets executed. I think, that could seem a little bit more difficult, but in just being on both sides of the fence, that the tactical execution is really the much more difficult part. And then I would say it's when you're on the client side or the customer industry side, I think it forces you to really learn the ins and outs of the business down to like the people and what their skill sets are, what motivates them, because it's like you're the one that's ultimately leading them and accountable for delivering it. I think that there's just generic frameworks, and then there's obviously industry expertise and a lot of value add that consulting firms bring, speaking as a former consultant. But it's definitely been, it was a great learning experience at Focus Brands before I got to ICRA Group. So I think learn to work with teams and identify who are the right stakeholders. You got to find sometimes who's the junior person that's really chomping at the bit to step up, making sure to get them involved and give them everything they need to succeed. Whereas when I was in consulting, it was a little bit, those were, I think, some of those people aspects that you didn't have to look at as much because you were kind of putting together the plan, and it was more on, someone like me or someone at the actual industry side to figure out, okay, now how do we actually take this and mobilize it with what we have?
Yeah, it's great perspective. That's something unique you bring to the table. You've been on both sides, so I appreciate you sharing that. All right, a couple questions that are a little bit more specific to you. Something you're looking forward to in the year ahead. It can be professional or personal.
I think, from a professional side, it's just continuing to watch this company evolve and really grow and just kind of like mature and take shape. And like I said, we have great leaders. I think they've instilled a good culture in us, but it's very motivating seeing these teams come together. I would say a lot of what happens at your group, especially with on the America side and teams we work with, is like we constantly are having these meetings and just like light bulbs going off left and right. And then when the light bulb goes off, you see like a next level of like motivation. And I truthfully, I think that's where a lot of the just welding of the cultures and willingness to work and help each other, that's really where it comes from. When these light bulb goes off, it's like, we're almost like, it's like, oh my gosh, it's like you're connecting A and B, and then both sides to like, oh my gosh, and then everyone knows exactly what to do. And it's almost, I think that's where I'm there to sometimes be like, okay, well, let's calm down, let's put together the plan to execute this. But seeing people just constantly get motivated, that's what's, I think, something I'm looking forward to, because it's been really a wild ride the first 8 months, and it's continued to snowball and get better and better. So I think kind of the coming together of this company is something I'm really looking forward to professionally. Personally, I think just being back in Chicago, it's been cool for me, right? I've actually never actually lived like in the city of downtown Chicago, right? Grew up in the suburbs. And then this is the first time I've actually moved and lived back here since high school. So I think finally, from Chicago, but not really. actually like living downtown, and I think experiencing that is something I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. When did you move back?
I moved back in end of June.
Okay. Yep. And made it back just in time for one of the worst winters we've had in recent memory. So
Yep, yeah,
congratulations.
exactly.
Yeah. What is a resource that's been valuable to you in your career and that you could recommend to others?
I think it's been like mentors and
Mhm.
people, right? I think when I was at Deloitte, and it's not something I think is given away for free. I think it was earned with hard work and respect, and ultimately, whether it was a partner or a manager, there's people that I think I saw that led a way that I wanted to lead, and so it was just as simple as even saying, can we stay in touch, catch up in consulting in an office on Friday, or if it's a touch point. That's definitely been, I think, the best resource for me is just building a really large network. And I think that was one of the cool aspects of Focus Brands. It's because you have the 7 different brands, there's a lot of leaders, a lot of experience. Same thing at ICRA Group. There's people with, and I should say, I think really Focus Brands was much more about like the mentorship of how to be a leader in management. And then now at ICRA Group, I think for me personally, it's learning a lot more about the industry because it's, like I said, coming in, did not know the complexities of something even from like a chocolate perspective. But then at your group, we have just just hundreds of years of experience in this space. And so that's, I think, a little bit more what I seek out now is a little bit more like that industry expertise versus the, some of the management and like those aspects that I gained through consulting, and then had just constant access to strong leaders. And I think people that once you've worked with them and you've kind of maybe earned their respect, that really did want to help you and guide you, and almost, I think, felt very just kind of took the ownership of it. If I reached out to them and said, hey, I loved working with you and would just love to continuously have and stay in touch so I can continue to learn, because it's just, I guess, what's the right way to look at it, almost like the inspiration, but taking little aspects. And that's the great part of consulting, was just being on those different teams, meeting so many different leaders, being exposed to so many different styles. And I think just kind of seeing what I wanted to, I guess, have in my own management skill set.
Yeah. Yeah. We've talked about this on this podcast before, that mentorship doesn't always have to be a formal program, and it doesn't even have to be called mentor, like mentor, mentoree. It's to your point, it's a network. It's staying in touch with somebody. It's, it doesn't always have to be this like, here, would you be my mentor? Yes, I will. Sign the contract. And
absolutely not.
What you just said about earning it, I love that, because it's not just something that's just given, and but you can earn mentorship or someone's willingness to help through hard work or through dedication or through even adding value to that person yourself. So
I think when you reach out, I feel like for most part people are always willing to help and willing to give advice, but it takes a little bit more of like a personal level. And I think the mentor is much more invested in the mentee when it's I feel like earned maybe is not the right word, but it is ultimately like earned. It's like we've worked, we've been in the trenches together, and now we're out of it, but they take a lot more ownership of like, I do very much do want you to succeed because I've worked with you, and kind of take a little bit more responsibility. And that's something, as people have reached out to me as well, it's been the ones that I've, worked with, and I know kind of just very driven, hardworking, and, you want to see them succeed. So you are much more willing to say, yeah, let's schedule the call, whatever I can do to help.
I love that. Any advice for future leaders that you could offer outside of get good mentors and have a great network?
I think for me, and this is something that the leaders at your group have really helped, is especially coming into a situation where I didn't know a lot about it. I think I had the right background and levels of industry experience for some parts of the business, but it's been, I think, listening, really. That's it. My early days at ICRA, even at Focus, it was kind of just like scheduling these calls with a lot of different stakeholders and then kind of just throwing some stuff out there and then listening to both sides talk. And I think listening is one thing, but being able to like listen and distill everything you just heard, I think that's a really strong leadership component. Something that I've posted the consulting world, it was really them that's taken off, and folks have really helped me. It's like the art of listening, and then understanding how that should translate into the way you lead, the plans you put together. I can't express that enough. Is just like listening, but in a almost a different, deeper way.
Yeah, you think on the surface the consultant comes in and tells you what to do, but clearly the crucial first step is understanding, and you only get there by listening.
Yeah,
probably have very similar reality with transformation. You can't just go in and start transforming or innovating. You need to first unpack a situation, understand, listen, ask. I think that's great advice.
And actually, it was something I think just the consultants have to come in so rigid with agenda. And I think now a lot of your groups where I learn the most is when you don't come in with that rigid agenda. It's almost come in with like a high level prompt and then just kind of see where the conversation takes you. And I think listening to that, we've had so many different conversations amongst like sales leaders at ICRA Group where we all come in and we just almost like a prompt, and then we walk out and we're like, wow, like everyone learned a ton. So,
cool. Well, I've really enjoyed listening to you. I can't thank you enough for sharing some of your insight and inspiration here on this show. Excited to follow along with ICRA Group and what you do as you guys grow. And next time I eat a delicious chocolate, I'll be thinking of this conversation.
Please do. No, thank you guys for having me. I think this is a very, very cool podcast. Told you that from before. And you are the advisors of folks on the right office space. And the office space is, I think, crucial to building the culture. And so who better to have those conversations than someone that is going to go out and actually help you find the right office space to build your culture. So appreciate you guys having me.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to rate our show. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Work Inspired podcast so that you don't miss any of the incredible guests we have planned for upcoming episodes. We'll continue to find the best and brightest minds in business so that you can learn, grow, and succeed, and so that we can all work inspired. Work Inspired is brought to you by BOS, a leader in commercial working environments and a Hayworth best-in-class dealership. Experience our 360 approach and discover the team, tools, and techniques required to navigate the complexity of your next workspace at BOS.com. If you have ideas, feedback, or would like to be featured on our show, please email podcast@BOS.com. Thank you for listening. This has been a Workspace digital production. If you're interested in launching a podcast at your organization, please email info@workspace.digital for a free consultation.